So Jade City was my first adult fantasy novel, and I was writing it while I was writing the Exo duology. But by the time it came out, people were like, well, you switched gears, you went from science fiction to fantasy and then from young adult to adult. But I didn't really see it that way because I had been writing them concurrently. It was just the order of publication was such that sometimes when you're the way the books land, people are like, oh, you made this, this jump to another category, another genre. But the Greenbone Saga was Jade City, the first book. I was one that I wrote on spec. I didn't know whether it would sell, but I wrote it really as a passion project. It was, like you said, it was this this amalgam of things that I loved that I wanted to smash together. Inspiration from crime drama, obviously The Godfather, but also a lot of Eastern crime drama from Hong Kong cinema, like Election and John Woo movies and Infernal Affairs, and my love of kung fu flicks and epic fantasy, all kind of mashed together. So it ended up being this this project that was really, I thought, was like for a target audience of one, me specifically. And it was just really gratifying when it ended up becoming my breakout work. It definitely is the series that has gotten the most attention. It ended up, when we went on submission, it sold very quickly, and my editor asked me for a trilogy, which I was very, very happy about because I knew there was more of the story to tell. I didn't know whether I'd get to tell it, and immediately, like, just was glad that I got to turn it into a trilogy. The place that the story takes place is an island called Kekon. It is the only place in the world with magic jade, and that is that resource is coveted by the rest of the world, and it's a time period that is very reminiscent of our late 20th century. So globalization is happening, modernization is happening. Kekon used to be very isolated and sort of insular, but now it's opening up to the rest of the world. There's foreign powers who want the jade as well. And it was something that used to be used only by the Kekonese, but foreign powers have figured out how to manufacture a drug that will allow other people to use it as well. So there's a lot of sort of backdrop of this conflict and geopolitical things going on, but it's really the story about this one family, the Cull family, and they are the head of one of the Greenbone clans. And the Greenbones are the people in the society who are trained to use jade and who are able to use it. And jade gives people the sort of powers, enhanced human abilities that you might see in your favorite wuxia kung fu flick, where they can run, light up walls and punch through concrete and sense people from across the room. And so there are people who are trained to use jade, but there are a minority of people, and it takes a long time to train to be able to use it. And if you don't use it well, or you are overexposed, you can suffer all these terrible health detriments, including going insane. So the Greenbone clans control jade, and war breaks out between the two biggest. And the story is really it is about clan warfare, but at its heart, it's a family saga, much like The Godfather is not really a story about gangsters, it's a story about family. They just happen to be gangsters. And that was sort of the same philosophy that I went into the story with. Jade City is pretty contained, takes place over the course of about a year. It's how the clan war breaks out. Of course, your first book is always just, there's nothing like it, right? It's kind of like your first child being born, right? The realization of something that you've worked towards for a long time, and like it is pretty amazing and special. But I'm always careful to tell debut authors it's also pretty stressful. I don't think it's you can't understate the amount of kind of anxiety that happens in your debut year as well, because there's this almost inevitable reality that it can't always live up to being the perfect shiny image of your book finally being published, because what you've built up in your mind as being this big dream is going to crash into things like not having the marketing that you want, or being under deadline for your second book and being stressed about doing that at the same time and worrying whether you're going to be able to sell another work, or in my case, my publisher, they did a good job on Zero Boxer, but the editor ended up leaving shortly thereafter. The company got sold to a different publisher. There was about 6 months where my book was not in stock. So things like that happen. And so oftentimes the debut is not everything that you imagined it would be. It's not like, your friends and family will be extremely supportive and happy for you, but there is a sort of there's a sort of feeling of like the day after Christmas afterwards sometimes, of like, what do I do now? Like, I wrote a book, like, can I do it again? Should I do it again? And so Zero Boxer was, I was very happy and proud of the fact that it got quite a bit of positive reaction. It was on a bunch of state reading lists. It was nominated for awards, and so it certainly made me feel like I could and should write again. And by that point, I'd written EXO, and so things continued on. Jade City was almost like debuting again, because of the fact that it was with a different publisher. It was a different genre, and so in a way there was like a second run at the debut fanfare. Our industry is very strange, right, in that it like really loves debuts, and those of us who've been writing for a while, it's kind of like, oh, now we're old news, but like they love brand new stuff. And to the extent that I was able to sort of tap into that debut energy a second time, it was great, because people, it was an entry point into my work for new readers. And you asked about awards and acclaim and accolades. Like, that stuff is, it is fantastically useful and important from a career standpoint, in that it gets press, it gets people who look at those lists, who pay attention to the awards, who might pick up the book and see, oh, hey, it won some stuff, to give it a chance. Like, that is all fantastic. But it is also it also is something that can get into your head and can be pressure. And so in a way, you have to kind of appreciate it, take it in, and then set it aside and focus on just the day-to-day work. Jade War expands over the over a few more years, but it really takes that conflict international and shows what happens in all these other countries. And then Jade Legacy ends up being a story that spans 20 years, and it's an intergenerational story. I really wanted the family to be the centerpiece of the story, and for it not to be any one character's showpiece, but each character in the family is a pretty crucial point of view character. And what I was careful to do was to balance all of them. The great benefit of having multiple point of view characters in the story is you see those characters not just as they see themselves, but as how all the rest of their family sees them. And that makes them seem much more fully fleshed out and multidimensional, because sometimes we have blind spots where we don't see necessarily how our spouse sees us, or our children, or our parents do. So that was a lot of fun for me, was just to kind of draw all the relationships between those characters. I didn't want a favorite to run away with the story. So every time I felt like maybe I was giving a little bit too much page time to one of the characters, I sort of went back and looked at what were the other characters doing and ramped up their presence. So I was constantly balancing the different family members. But I love them all in different ways. There's definitely the stories where, it really is one person's story, and you can tell it's almost autobiographical in a sense, because the authors really injected themselves into the character, and those stories can work great. But in my case, it was an ensemble piece, and I really wanted it to feel that way, and for readers to each have their own favorites, which they absolutely do. It's been pretty gratifying to see readers disagree heatedly about who the best character is, and the ones who love one character often dislike one of my other characters, and vice versa. And so that actually is a sign to me that I did my job right, where there's no consensus about, you know, who's the best character, and people can argue vehemently about it. Probably the most enjoyable part of that was getting to have a very different setting for one of the main characters, who goes and moves to another country that's more reminiscent of like our Western world. So it's kind of coded, you know, a Western power country. And that character is part of an immigrant community there. And so I got to do something that I don't see a lot in fantasy novels, which is a modern diaspora story. And that character, you know, he has to adjust to living to a new place. There's this whole community, people who, you know, retain some of the culture from their homeland, but also take culture from the place that they have moved to. And so that was really fun for me, was just creating this fictional cultural diaspora. And you know, showing that, like, and there's another country as well where some of the people from Kekon have emigrated to. And you know, we don't see that a ton in traditional fantasy. Traditional fantasy is often like, you know, there's this ancient world and this land with kings, and people have been here for like generations and generations, and there's some bloodline that has been, you know, of the royalty that's been there for ages and ages. So you don't really sort of see that in that medieval inspired fantasy. But because I had a modern era fantasy in which people move, they get on planes, they go to do business, they you know, they pick up and relocate. I got to play with the idea of like, what if you know, how does magic jade treated outside of the place where it came from? And other countries have different attitudes toward it. The people who wear it, who immigrate elsewhere, they're treated as outsiders, and they're shunned and discriminated against for using it. And you know, there's just a lot of kind of cool societal stuff that I got to explore as part of expanding the canvas with that second book. So I usually know the ending when I start writing. So there's a scene at the end of Jade Legacy that was in my mind from pretty early on. And I knew I had to get to that scene, and then it was a matter of figuring out how to get there. But I had a pretty strong sense. I didn't know all the specifics, but I usually have a pretty decent sense of what the end is.